that there have been swinging cuts to local authorities, and therefore now the onus is going to be on people who have valuable assets, essentially to pay a lot more for their care. I mean, when we look at the means test,
because as you say, they see the need.
Right. Well, but do they? They may not think they should be the ones paying for it. If you look at the means testing of the winter fuel allowance, how much will that raise?
Well, I mean, the number that I've seen is 1.7 billion. I don't know if it's
honestly,
correct. It depends on the precise level. But look, again, that's something that it's a sort of an irony in a way to see that the Labour Party campaigning against something. There's an extremely progressive
campaigning
way,
against some pensioners here.
Yeah, extremely progressive way to raise money for something that is badly needed, which is putting more resources into social care.
Because the point about the original idea, was universal provision. And that enabled people to, not claim. I mean, there's very vivid figures on the numbers of people who just don't claim because of the means test. And that's what Beveridge was trying to get rid of.
It's very simply progressive in the sense that it's taking money from better off people to fund something that helps everyone.
That's done. Can I just finish?
Yes.
That's done through the tax system. I mean, I'm not rich, but, my winter fuel allowance and my pension is all part of my tax, so I get taxed on it. So it goes back into the system. So actually, it's sneaky to say, you're going to be brave and cut the winter fuel. A lot of richer people don't claim it, don't have it. They just don't want it.
And more people will end up not claiming it, of course. That will be the problem with it, won't it?
Anybody wealthy is taxed on it anyway, so it goes back into the system. So it's actually not really a practical measure.
All right.
Let me just mention, though, the issue with regard to older people. Yesterday, the Conservative Party abandoned older people. There was a triple whammy. The tearing up of the triple lock, the attack on the winter fuel allowance, and yes, the plans on care costs where people could lose control of their homes. I just want to mention the issue around the winter fuel allowance, because to be frank, I'm angry. I'm one of those people who campaigned against fuel poverty for a number of years and welcomed the introduction of the winter fuel allowance.
John McDonnell there, and we've been joined by Labour's election campaign chief, Andrew Gwynne. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. Just listening there to Rupert Harrison, this is a progressive measure in terms of social care and means testing winter fuel allowance, something that Labour should be applauding.
I'm proud of the record that the Labour government had in lifting 900,000 elderly people out of poverty. That is a record to be proud of, and in part we did that through introducing measures like the winter fuel allowance. I think it's a retrograde step. As we've already heard, the progressive way of dealing with the winter fuel allowance is to make sure that those wealthy pensioners have it clawed back through the taxation system.
But why is it not progressive, Andrew Gwynne? Why is it not progressive to make those who are better off pay a bit more or get a bit less from the state? Let's look at the winter fuel allowance first of all. Why should richer pensioners get that winter fuel allowance?
Well, we want to make sure that everybody who qualifies for the winter fuel allowance gets it. And the problem with means testing, as we've heard, is that there are a sizable number of people who do not apply for means tested benefits.
But do you agree it's progressive?
So, for example, like the pension credit, there are about a third of pensioners who are eligible for the pension credit who do not apply.
And I take that point, and we said that at the end, that actually it could result in more people not going forward for it. But as a principle, do you agree it is a progressive way to look at this particular
What is progressive
benefit?
is making sure that all pensioners get the winter fuel allowance and clawing back the additional money from those richest pensioners through the taxation system. Because actually what is being talked about here are around 10 million pensioners potentially losing their winter fuel allowance out of the 12 million pensioners that get it.
All right.
That's not progressive. That is an attack on pensioner incomes.
Right. Well, let's have a look at the pensions triple lock, because now the Conservative manifesto is saying it's going to be a triple lock till 2020 and then a double lock. Why did you not go for something similar? Why are you gold-plating guarantee for better off pensioners when younger people are struggling, for example, to travel to university and college or even try and get on the housing ladder?
Well, you know, Joe, because I'm sure you've well-thumbed the Labour manifesto for the many, not the few. It's not either or. We want to make sure that young people are looked after. That's why we're committed to building homes. It's why we're committed to reintroducing.
But why are you
the
gold-plating a
education
guarantee for
maintenance
better off pensioners with the triple lock?
Because the pensioners today have made this country what it is, and I think that we should owe them a guarantee that whatever is the highest, prices, wages, or 2.5%, they are guaranteed that in their pension increases.
No, I understand the policy. What I'm saying is why do you feel the need to continue with the pensions triple lock when, in fact, the double lock would serve pretty well too? Well, the double lock, of course, if we look back over the past 5 years, would have resulted in the same cohort of pensioners receiving £330 less. So, of course, for those pensioners, the triple lock has actually served them well in the past. All right.
We want to give them the confidence that in the future they will have the same guarantees.
What about the social care proposals? Are they not progressive?
Well, we support a cap on social care provision.
At what level?
Well, what we've said is that we will have a cross-party review in the next Parliament.
We've had endless cross-party reviews. We had the Dilnot proposals. And
Absolutely.
Social care, as you have
Absolutely.
stated yourselves in the Labour Party, is already being cut to the bone, as you would see it, and people are struggling. So why can't you give me a cap level now?
Well, Joe, that has to be discussed. What we are talking about is £8 billion extra into adult social care, £1 billion immediately in the first year, not least to help raise the wages of those people who are working in pretty shocking conditions on 15-minute
But why won't you support a
contracts?
proposal that is actually, and these are the words you often use, which puts more of the burden on those with the broader shoulders? People with assets of £100,000 or less will get the state to intervene on their behalf. Those with more won't.
Because we think a cap is a fairer way of doing it. This is an attack on elderly people, Joe.
Well, not the poorest who you claim to help.
We do not support the Conservatives' proposals. Let me make that very clear. We will discuss an appropriate cap level in the next Parliament on a cross-party basis.
What do you think about this sort of more universalist approach by Labour compared to what the Tories would argue is a more progressive look at some expensive proposals?
I think universalism is progressive. I mean, that's what the Beveridge, I mean, he after all wasn't even Labour, he was a rather patronising Liberal, but he believed in that, universal provision.
Is it affordable, though, still?
Yes, because you get the funds through a proper taxation system, which means taxing inheritance, taxing wealth, taxing corporate.
But these are taxing to some
tax.
extent assets, aren't they, in the
yes,
social care proposals?
Yes, but it can be done much more systematically without the indignity of the means test. That's the point. I mean, and that's what's good about the Labour manifesto, that there's a clear reversal of all these concessions to the wealthy, people who've got unearned wealth,
right,
which is like capital gains and inheritance. And if you attack those, you have a progressive tax system which can then fund a universal provision and good actual care.
What about the fact that Andrew Gwynne is saying they still haven't decided on a cap level? I mean, is it still credible to be talking about proposals and wanting more cross-party talks which collapsed over this critical issue of social care?
Well, the problem with setting a cap is that once you set a cap, you've got to work out how much it costs and then you've got to work out where the money comes from. So one thought on the principle. In order to make their argument, Labour is this morning having to argue against means testing. John McDonnell is having to say that I don't think means testing when it comes to winter fuel is a good idea.
There's another issue, though, on the universalism versus means testing. If you do believe in that, which is obviously perfectly credible, will you be restoring child benefit to everyone?
Well, look, we are where we are with that particular benefit.
Well, either you believe in the principle of universalism or you don't.
Absolutely, but that decision has now been taken by the previous Parliament. What we're talking about here is a specific proposal by the Conservatives that actually, in their uncosted manifesto, because, Joe, you've at least got a document that you can go through.
I've got it here.
That says where we would be taxing, where we would be raising revenues, where we would be getting the funding for our proposals. The Conservatives are getting away with producing a document that has, 80 pledges that doesn't give any indication where the funding's coming from.
All right,
and I think that's really important that we hold the Tories' feet to the coals on this.
Just finally, on immigration, you don't have any target at all, of course, for net migration. Is that credible in an election like this?
Well, I think it is, because what we've said is that under the Brexit negotiations, there, of course, are now going to be controls on immigration.
But you have no ambition,
from within the European Union. But we are going to have an immigration policy that serves our economy, because what we have to take into account is where there are skill shortages in the NHS, in the care sector, in the agriculture sector, in tourism, and
but
how
immigration could go up.
and how we fill those gaps, Joe, in a way that works for our economy.
Andrew Gwynne, thank you.
Thank you.
Is it a policy or merely an ambition?
It's a policy to get immigration. I'm so sorry. Is it not a policy to get immigration
It's an
down?
ambition, and we've had it in previous manifestos.
Oh, hang on. What's the difference between an ambition and a policy? I mean, you've had it in previous manifestos and you've palpably not delivered it. So I had assumed by repeating it that there was some meaning to it this time.
Well, it's our aim to continue to bear down on immigration. And of course, for the first time, this is going to become easier as we leave the European Union. There will be no further entitlement to freedom of movement. At the moment, it's unlimited.
Michael Fallon speaking on Newsnight last night. Well, we've been joined by Gurnek Bains, the chief executive of a new think tank, Global Future, which is arguing for a net immigration target of at least 200,000. And UKIP's immigration spokesman, John Bickley, joins us from the BBC's newsroom in Salford. Welcome to both of you. Gurnek Bains, you say that the Conservative Party's pledge, which they've restated to cut net migration to the tens of thousands, is impossible to fulfil without devastating economic consequences. How so?
Well, I think there's a responsibility on governments when they identify a pledge like that to say how it will be met and what the consequences of that will be. And just to put it in perspective, net migration is 273 now. The tens of thousands target has been around for 7 years. It's been 20 years since we've been anywhere close to achieving the 100,000 target. And our view is that we cannot move towards this target without serious economic consequences and social consequences for the country.
John Bickley, what do you say to that?
Well, I think the Tory party are taking the British voters for fools. As has just been said, they've been telling us, in fact, 2 prime ministers have been telling us for 7 years, they want to reduce it to the tens of thousands. Now,
but you want to take it even lower, so if you don't think it's possible to the tens of thousands, how on earth do you think you're going to achieve it by bringing it down even more?
If I could just finish, I looked at the Tory party manifesto yesterday, and first of all, I couldn't find anything on immigration. It's tucked away in the back of their manifesto. It doesn't have its own chapter heading. I eventually found it. It's about 3 paragraphs. There's an allusion to tens of thousands and some waffle about maybe at some point in the future. I mean, this is just not acceptable for a government that will get re-elected on June the 8th to mislead the British people.
All right, well, let's have a look at your policy, because Paul Nuttall, UKIP's leader, said yesterday there'd be a one-in, one-out system for immigration, and the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, has said that the fall in foreign nationals coming to this country will cost £16 billion by 2020. Is that a price worth paying?
I don't believe that at all. Let's go back to 1973 when we last voted. In fact, we voted to stay in the European Union, then the EEC. For the next 22 years, up to when the Labour government came to power, there was balanced immigration. And during that time, the British economy boomed. It became one of the most successful economies in the world. The Tories handed over a booming economy to the Labour government. In fact, they may even have handed over a surplus. We had balanced immigration for 22 years.
Well, let's put that to Gurnek Bains. Well, let's put that to Gurnek Bains. So it is possible to achieve a balanced immigration in this country and not harm the economy?
That's a historical view, Joe.
Oh, that's handy.
Because actually, there are a whole set of trends that we articulate in our report. The UK has a massively ageing population. In those years, we were not at full employment, and we are. And when we hit full employment in 2003, immigration was near 200,000. We also have a productivity crisis in this country. You put all that together, you need net migration, we believe, in the 200k. Looking forward, looking backwards, I can see why people have pulled this figure out.
But how would our public services be run if there was an immediate drop, significant drop in net migration? You've talked about a 5-year period, haven't you?
We're talking about an average net zero migration target over 5 years, and that wouldn't be happening for at least 2 years before we leave the EU.
Right.
Now, your guest just touched on something which I think is the elephant in the room. Our productivity in this country is appalling. Out of the G7, we're sixth. We're 35% behind America and Germany.
And what do you think would improve it?
Well, that's a whole debate in itself. But just
you said it's terrible, but what's your proposal for improving it?
Just to assume that letting in hundreds of thousands of more people willy-nilly is going to solve our productivity problem is not the answer to the question.
What is?
Well, we have to improve the education that our kids are getting. We need to improve training.
And how long would that take, do you think?
Well, of course it would take time, which is why, over a period of years, you would, from our point of view, you're not looking at a cliff edge with controlling immigration. You're looking at giving a Migration Control Commission 2 years before we leave the EU and then 5 years to get this under control.
Out of interest, on your Migration Control Commission, you've spoken about this before, who would sit on your commission?
Well, I would see people such as the CBI, the TUC, Chambers of Commerce, representatives from Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England.
Well, they're very unhappy, certainly the CBI, about any changes to bring down migration dramatically because of the effect they say it would have on business. So if, like the OBR, they concluded that net migration, let's say, in a couple of years' time should be 200,000 a year, would you be prepared to go with that? Well,
we would set up the Migration Control Commission with a specific target, and they would be charged with meeting that target. And of course, the CBI, I'm afraid, supports the big corporates, the big multinationals who benefit from cheap labour but don't pay corporation tax or don't pay their fair share. So rather than them just having the benefits of cheap labour, which the taxpayer then has to pick up the bill for all the public services to service that cheap labour, we need to actually look at the CBI's clients and actually ask them to start investing in technology.
Let me put
the social impact of a loss of migration is that people will see they won't necessarily be able to get carers for their parents. They'll go to the NHS and won't have the level of staff. They'll see their high street restaurants, hotels, etc., suffering and potentially going bust.
Why can't we train more British? Why can't we train more people here to do those jobs? I mean, it may take a bit of time, but it's possible.